Paris on the brink. Hey, Histox fam! Buckle up for another epic tale. Let's dive into history's untold stories. Paris was in crisis. Until recently, the war had felt distant. Yet now, it had arrived at its doorstep. Desperate refugees tried to flee the city. Abandoned cars lined the roads, and the shadow of war stretched across the boulevards of the capital. In the sky above, a German monoplane bearing iron crosses dropped bombs and an ominous message over the City of Light. The message was simple, but chilling. The German army is at the gates of Paris. In the heart of the chaos, a lean, bespectacled man stood firm. General Joseph Gallieni, the military governor of Paris in September 1914, declared, "I have received the mandate to defend Paris against the invader. That mandate I shall carry out to the end." In August 1914, Germany faced a long-dreaded nightmare, a war on two fronts, France in the west, Russia in the east. But the Germans had a bold strategy, the infamous Schlieffen Plan. According to this plan, German armies would charge through Belgium, swing around behind French defenses, and seize Paris within just 42 days. The German war machine roared to life, striking Belgium with relentless speed and fury. Their goal? To bypass France's border defenses and drive a knife straight into the heart of the Republic. But the Germans weren't the only ones under the spell of a quick, decisive victory. When the Great War erupted, military minds across Europe were gripped by a shared delusion, the cult of the offensive. In their view, attack meant victory, defense meant weakness. France, under this doctrine, enacted Plan 6/7. French armies would strike into Alsace and Lorraine, territories lost in 1870, hoping to reclaim them in a single glorious battle. But what awaited them was not glory, but disaster. The battles of the frontiers began. Over 2 million soldiers clashed, then the largest battle in human history. In the city of Mons, the newly arrived British Expeditionary Force fought valiantly under Sir John French. But the French armies fared far worse. Dressed in conspicuous uniforms, poorly equipped, and lacking sufficient artillery support, they were overwhelmed. The French offensive spirit clashed disastrously with cold German steel. One after another, the French forces were driven back, bloodied and bewildered. After successive defeats, French Chief of Staff Joseph Joffre ordered a general retreat to northern France. During this withdrawal, the French and British fought rearguard actions, but the tide seemed impossible to turn. Using France's vast railway network, Joffre redeployed his troops to the River Marne and formed a fresh Sixth Army near Paris. By early September, German cavalry patrols were just 13 kilometers from the capital. It appeared the Schlieffen Plan was working. Paris was about to fall. Despite the promising position for Germany, cracks began to form. The French and British retreats were orderly, denying the Germans their desired crushing blow. Logistics faltered. Belgium's railways were in ruins. German armies were overstretched and undersupplied. Most dangerously, German high command, led by Helmuth von Moltke, was too far from the front to control the battle. Their forces were acting almost entirely independently. With chaos mounting, General Alexander von Kluck, commanding the First German Army, made a fateful decision. Rather than encircle Paris from the west, he swung his army eastward, aiming to join up with General Karl von Bülow's Second Army. This opened a dangerous gap between the two German forces. French command seized the moment. Through radio intercepts, air reconnaissance, and even a map recovered from a fallen German officer, they learned of von Kluck's new direction. The Germans had bypassed Paris, and in doing so, left their flank exposed. General Joffre and Gallieni both knew this was their chance. On the morning of 5 September, the French Sixth Army under General Michel-Joseph Montgomery struck east of Paris, right into von Kluck's vulnerable left flank. Facing them, only 23,000 German reservists, poorly equipped and underprepared. Though the Germans counterattacked with intense artillery fire, the French caught them off guard. The lines trembled. Von Kluck had dismissed warnings from his reconnaissance planes. Now, he faced the consequences. In response to the French strike, von Kluck rushed reinforcements to his left and prepared a counteroffensive. Meanwhile, Joffre ordered a general offensive across a 257-kilometer front. It became the largest battle in European history. Over 1 million German soldiers clashed with 1.25 million French and 125,000 British troops. Each advance was paid for in blood. Industrial warfare had arrived, and it was merciless. The Battle of the Marne was a battle of maneuver, but speed could no longer win the day. Exposed attackers were shredded by machine gun fire. In one tragic episode, a Moroccan battalion charged the German lines and suffered 85% casualties. The French high command still clung to old ideas. Digging trenches was seen as cowardly, even shameful. One staff officer of Joffre wrote, "The idea of organizing any kind of defense aroused an almost innate repugnance. To dig into the earth was considered a dishonorable gesture. The weapons were cruel, but at times the men were crueler." In one dark incident, a German battalion surrendered with a white flag, only to be fired upon by advancing French troops. 450 men died, a massacre in the chaos of war. The rules of civility vanished. The Marne was not just a test of arms, it was a test of humanity. In one of the most iconic moments of the war, General Gallieni requisitioned around 600 Parisian taxicabs to rush reinforcements to Monne's 6th Army, northeast of the city. Though their military effect was minor, the symbolic value was immense. For the first time, civilians directly took part in saving the capital. The spirit of Paris was behind the wheel. As von Kluck moved his forces left to counter the 6th Army, a 48-kilometer gap opened between his 1st Army and Bülow's 2nd Army. It was a gift to the Allies. General Louis Franchet d'Espèrey, commanding the French 5th Army, struck north into the gap. The British Expeditionary Force, hesitant at first, joined in after an emotional plea from Joffre. Though the British advanced more slowly than Joffre had hoped, their pressure, alongside the French 5th Army, proved decisive. At the Battle of the Two Morans, Bülow's 2nd Army found itself flanked and under severe pressure. While the eastern French lines struggled to hold, the German Western Front teetered on collapse. Still, German high command remained detached, both physically and strategically. On 8 September, Moltke, unaware of the full gravity of the situation, sent a liaison officer, Richard Hensch, to assess the front and deliver orders. Hensch had full verbal authority to issue commands in Moltke's name if necessary. What lay ahead would shape the course of the war. Hensch visited the Eastern armies first and found conditions stable. But when he reached Bülow's headquarters, he realized just how critical the situation had become. The front was buckling, and reinforcements were lacking. With reports of Allied forces massing in the gap, Bülow made the decision to retreat. Hensch, after seeing the reality for himself, approved the withdrawal. Von Kluck, still locked in brutal combat with the French 6th Army, was furious at the idea of retreat. But the order had come via Hensch, with Moltke's full backing. Reluctantly, von Kluck pulled his forces north, abandoning hopes of seizing Paris. The Schlieffen Plan was crumbling. 2 days later, Moltke, now fully aware of the unfolding disaster, issued a general retreat along the Western Front. The mighty German advance was over. French and British forces pursued the retreating Germans, but instead of a broken enemy, they found troops digging in on new defensible positions. The nature of the war had changed. The Germans halted their retreat on the ridges overlooking the River Aisne, establishing strong defensive positions. When the French tried frontal assaults, they were repulsed with horrific losses. The Battle of the Marne had ended, but something even darker had begun: the age of the trenches. With the advance halted and men exhausted, both sides began digging into the earth. What had once been temporary shelters turned into permanent networks of trenches. Though once scoffed at by the French, trench warfare had become a grim necessity. The Germans, with their meticulous engineering, constructed some of the most formidable defensive systems seen to date. The open fields of France were now scarred with ditches, sandbags, and barbed wire. As both sides entrenched along the Marne and Aisne, they each attempted to outflank the other to the north. This series of maneuvers became known as the Race to the Sea. From village to village, field to field, both armies crept further north, digging fresh trenches with each engagement. Eventually, the trench line stretched from the Swiss border to the North Sea, a vast, unbroken front of mud, death, and stalemate. By the end of 1914, both sides were stuck. Germany had failed to take Paris. France could not dislodge the enemy from its soil. The war of movement had collapsed into a war of position. Neither side could advance without paying an unbearable cost in lives. The front lines became a symbol of frustration, a testament to the industrial age's terrifying marriage of mass warfare and static defense. The Schlieffen Plan, once hailed as Germany's path to a quick victory, lay in ruins. The carefully timed sequence of strikes and turns had failed, undone by poor coordination, stubborn resistance, and sheer overreach. What had been intended as a war lasting 6 weeks was now turning into a war with no end in sight. Years later, the failure at the Marne would be woven into a dangerous myth, the Dolchstoßlegende, or stab-in-the-back legend. Rather than admit strategic failure, many Germans blamed defeat on internal traitors. Jews, Freemasons, liberals, even communists. According to this twisted tale, the German army had not been defeated. It had been betrayed. This myth would fester, poisoning politics and paving the way for future disaster. After the Marne, the war descended into a nightmare of mud, rats, and constant shellfire. The world of open fields and cavalry charges had vanished, replaced by the steel nerves of men buried in earth. Rain turned the trenches to mire. Disease spread like wildfire. Death came from above, from behind, and from the silence of night. It was no longer about winning, it was about surviving. By early 1915, the front line had become a wall of death, stretching from the Channel coast to the Alps. Each side threw everything they had to break the line. Infantry waves, poison gas, and artillery barrages. Nothing worked. Every attempt to win the war simply added to the body count. The war that followed the Marne bore little resemblance to what had come before. Mass production had entered the battlefield. Aircraft, machine guns, gas, flamethrowers, tanks. The killing became more efficient, less personal, more horrifying. But beneath the technology, it was still the flesh and blood of young men that filled the trenches and the graves. For all the devastation, one truth remained. Paris did not fall. The city that had stood on the edge of catastrophe had survived, thanks to the resolve of generals like Gallieni and Monnery and the courage of common soldiers. Even the taxi drivers of Paris had played their part. A city had stood against an empire and endured. The Battle of the Marne shattered the illusion of a swift and glorious war. It exposed the limits of 19th century tactics in the face of 20th century technology. And yet, rather than end the war, the Marne had ensured its continuation and its transformation into something far worse. The world would never be the same again. Paris was saved, but this was only the beginning of one of history's bloodiest battles. Did you know this clash changed the world's fate? What began as a dash for victory ended in a war that swallowed a generation. For more epic, true stories, don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button.